I have the great pleasure of introducing Stan Day, an outstanding Tulane University alum who is also a very close personal friend of mine. He and his wife Dana, both of whom are here today. Dana is also a Tulane alum of Newcomb College and a member of the board of Tulane. They are the ones that created the New Day Distinguished Lecture Series. And I'm so delighted that for the first time they allowed me to publicly recognize them in front of an audience, because up till now they've wanted to be in the shadows. They just don't like the spotlight. But I can't resist telling you a little about this incredible couple and what they have meant to Tulane University. For the last several years, Dana and Stan have supported the whole idea of innovation and social entrepreneurship at Tulane. The programs we have been able to develop over the last several years that have benefited hundreds of students at our university is because of their generosity. They fund the New Day Social Venture Challenge, many of which in this audience know of. The competition encourages Tulane student teams to compete for up to $20,000 in seed money to execute their innovative ideas. Last spring, we had a terrific undergraduate and graduate student participation in the challenge, and we expect the quality of the applicants to be even better this year. Likewise, last year, Dana and Stan endowed a professorship in social entrepreneurship to really round out their commitment to teaching, research, and service. Our newly named New Day professor is Byron Mouton, a professor of practice at the School of Architecture and director of Urban Build, which is one of the most dynamic programs at Tulane because it gives students hands-on experience in connecting their work in their studio to the community. I don't know whether you know this or not, for at least 3 years after Katrina, the single largest builder of single-family homes in New Orleans were students from the School of Architecture. They actually designed the Katrina cottages in Design Studio one semester, and the next semester they went out and built them themselves. Byron Mouton led this effort, and now he is the New Day professor because of Dana and Stan. But the reason we are here tonight is the Distinguished Speaker Series, which has welcomed 10 social innovators to campus since the program began in 2009 and continues to attract 3 to 4 visionary leaders each year. The Speaker Series is the perfect complement to the New Day competition and the Social Entrepreneurship Professorship Program. Together, these 3 programs are creating a vibrant culture of social responsibility, leadership, and creativity on our campus. As many of you know, Tulane University is the only research university in the country, the only one, that integrates public service into the core curriculum. All 4 years students are here. One of the projects we're working on right now, which we hope will be implemented next fall, is to develop a very comprehensive interdisciplinary curriculum in social innovation at the undergraduate level. A curriculum that will be a coordinate major that will allow every single student here, besides getting a major in some primary field, to take a secondary major in this important endeavor of social innovation. Through their generosity, Stan and Dana are inspiring our students, faculty, and our many regional partners to think about new ways of solving some of our greatest challenges. In a way, this isn't so surprising. As president of SRAM Corporation, and the name SRAM, by the way, comes from the first and middle names of 3 of its founders, Stan Day, who just happens to be one of them, is also a triathlete. And he introduced a revolutionary handlebar twist-shift device for mountain bikes in the late 1980s. Since then, the company has grown dramatically to become one of the world's largest bicycle accessories companies. By the way, on campus, we have a bicycling club. They are unbelievably talented and have won many awards. They think Stan Day is a living god. a living God because of what he has done to the bicycle industry. Stan is the man behind great ideas and innovation. And right next to him is Dana. Dana not only got her undergraduate degree from Newcomb College, but also a law degree. It is Dana that I've had most of my conversations with over the last several years. And I enjoy those conversations more than words can describe. Because Dana is incredibly smart, very creative, and has high expectations. And through Stan and Dana, we've been able to do some marvelous things. They've allowed us to dream bigger, and most importantly, they made the dreams come through their generosity. Please welcome Stan Day.
That was terrific, Scott. Thank you very much. On behalf of both Dana and myself, we're very pleased to be here and excited to be supporting this kind of activity. We feel it's really important. And for those of you that have, I think all of you have been to the boot, and you should know that I first introduced myself to Dana the second day of school in 1976 at the boot. So things can happen. We didn't get married until 7 years ago. At any rate, it's exciting to be here and to talk about this series and to be part of this. We hope it is inspiring and that it sparks ideas on how to create new models for social change. This year, we are also excited to be part of Tulane's homecoming events, so we really appreciate you coming out at 5 p.m. The series' objective is to showcase prominent and engaged leaders in social innovation and entrepreneurship, to share their experiences, philosophies, insights, and advice, to encourage our community to keep developing new solutions to solving our social challenges. With that in mind, it is my pleasure to introduce Paul Rice, founder and CEO of FairTrade USA. Paul opened TransFair's first national headquarters, a one-room office in a converted warehouse in downtown Oakland in late 1998. Paul came to FairTrade by way of the mountainous Segovia region of Nicaragua, where he worked for 11 years as a rural development specialist. Paul founded and led a highly successful organic coffee export cooperative called Prode Co-op. It introduced him to the transformational power of fair trade. Subsequently, Paul served as a strategy consultant and development advisor to 22 cooperative enterprises throughout Latin America and Asia, helping them become more competitive, democratic, and self-reliant. His firsthand experience over the last 20 years in the development of cooperative coffee export ventures around the world is unparalleled in the U.S. coffee industry. Paul has become a leading advocate of market linkage and enterprise development as core strategies for farmer empowerment and sustainable development. Paul holds an economic and political science degree from Yale University and an MBA from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. In 2000, he received the prestigious International Ashoka Fellowship for his pioneering work as a social entrepreneur in the fair trade movement. In 2001, Paul was recognized by the Avena Foundation for his leadership for change. Paul was also honored by the Klaus Schwab Foundation for social entrepreneurship as one of the world's top 40 social entrepreneurs in 2002. More recently, Paul has spoken on fair trade at the World Economic Forum in Davos. We're thrilled to have Paul speak today, but before he does, I also wanted to make sure that everyone knew that there will be a reception following this lecture at our Fair Trade store in Exchange located in the Student Center. So on your way to the Hullabaloo auction or during any part of your weekend, please make sure you visit the Exchange and see firsthand some of the ideas and themes that Paul is going to talk to us about. So please join me in welcoming Paul Rice.
Thank you, Stan. Can you hear me okay on this mic? Good? Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Dana, for your leadership and your support of the social entrepreneurship movement. And thank you all for coming out on Friday at 5 p.m. I feel a little guilty about being the last man standing between you and happy hour. Just talking about parents and faculty, of course, not talking about students. But seriously, thanks for coming out. So I want to start with a pop quiz. How many people here drink coffee? Of course, I should have known. You all are looking so perky. It was just the coffee, right? It wasn't me. So second question, how many people here have heard of Juan Valdez? Okay. Actually, that's surprising. So that's good. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, Juan Valdez is a TV commercial figure, Colombian coffee grower. And those commercials for Colombian coffee ran for years. Juan Valdez was in the commercials, and he's, he's out there in the sun, and his clothes are clean, and he's picking coffee, and he's got the whole burro thing going, and he looks happy. Even the burro looks happy. So if you think about it, we don't really have an image of the people around the world who make the things that we consume, who make the things that we eat or wear. But Juan Valdez is an interesting cultural icon, really, because we do, if we've seen those commercials, we do have the notion of what a coffee farmer is like. But I can tell you from my experience in the field that that happy Juan Valdez image is, well, it couldn't be further from the truth. Most coffee farmers in the world today have 1 or 2 acres of land. They live in very, very remote mountainous communities. They're isolated from markets, and they struggle to survive. They struggle to put food on the table. They struggle to keep their kids in school. It's not an easy existence. And a lot of that challenge, in my estimation, is related to lack of market access. Right? So many of the world's farmers, whether they're growing coffee or tea or bananas or cocoa beans for chocolate, they are isolated. And they don't have pickup trucks, so they don't really have the means to truck their own harvest to market. They don't have electricity in their home, so they sure don't have internet access to look up today's market price for coffee. And so they're really at the mercy, in many cases, of middlemen who, make a living rolling up into those hillside communities and buying product at very, very low prices. So it's that lack of market access that really locks so many of the world's small family farmers into a cycle of poverty. So it seems to me that one of the opportunities for those of us who are interested in addressing global poverty is how can we plug farmers more directly into the market. And we see it in our communities here in the United States in the form of farmers markets, right, where farmers and consumers come together in a more direct way, in a way that helps farmers get a better price, in a way that helps consumers know where their stuff is coming from. There's real value on both sides. So I guess the question is there a way for us to replicate that farmers market concept beyond the local? Is there a way for us to take that global? So I would argue that the good news in the face of this kind of dismal situation for farmers around the world, the good news is that we do have alternatives. And FairTrade is one of them. And FairTrade is built precisely on this notion that you can take that local farmers market concept and take it global. And then, in fact, the best solution to poverty in rural communities around the world isn't our aid or our charity, but it's our business. It's the market used in a way that, in fact, empowers and helps those families through direct market access to solve their own problems. So that's what FairTrade is all about. If you ask me to define FairTrade in a soundbite, I would say FairTrade is all about helping those small family farmers around the world to get organized and develop their business skills and to go direct in the global market. Because when families can go direct in the global market and jump over 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of middlemen, they're able to get a dramatically higher price for their harvest. And that in turn allows them to improve their lives, right? To do all the things that we all want to do with our lives, to have a comfortable living, to provide a better life for our kids. So that's what fair trade is all about. I'll tell you a story. Forgive me, I'm losing my voice. Terrible timing to lose your voice. 5 speeches in 2 days. But I have these lovely minders like Rebecca who have been following me with tea and honey the last 2 days. Thank you, Rebecca. So let me tell you a story about how I got involved in fair trade. Freshman year in college, taking classes in international development and political science and economics, and feeling this growing sense of concern and frustration and anger, really, with global poverty. I mean, the more I learned, the angrier I got, and the more frustrated I felt that in a world of plenty, there were people going hungry. And then, in fact, that farming folk, right, who had land were going hungry. And I wanted to learn more about that. And, of course, eventually I ended up wanting to save the world. And so I decided that the way for me to save the world, or do my bit, was to go off and work in a developing country and work with farmers. So a month after graduation, armed with a knapsack full of ideals and naivete, I got on a plane and went off to Nicaragua. And my goal was to find a project to sign on to and to work with farmers and do whatever I could do. You know, I had a degree in economics, but I didn't think that was that useful. I just wanted to help. And I thought I would stay for a year or 2, and then I'd come back to the U.S. and do something sensible, you know, like go to grad school. So I stayed for 11 years, and you know, I fell in love with the whole thing. But it was an amazing and often very challenging experience for me, because for the first, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of that experience, I was working on one development project after another, and you know, very much within the, you know, the kind of dominant paradigm of poverty alleviation, right, where you have well-intentioned people sitting in offices in Washington, D.C., and New York and London and Paris, sending millions of dollars in development aid to fund these projects to help lift people out of poverty. And my experience was really frustrating. I mean, I found that more often than not, these big projects, despite all the good intentions and despite all the money, were simply recreating dependency on aid. I don't think we were successful at helping farmers develop their own capacity to solve their own problems. And I know we didn't help farmers think about the market. You know, more often than not, the investment was in how to help farmers produce more, but not really help them figure out how to sell better. It was a volume strategy, not a margin strategy. And that, unfortunately, doesn't work. Despite what you may have heard about the Green Revolution, if you double your production on an acre of land, but still sell at a low price, you're not necessarily rising out of poverty. So, you know, after years of doing this, I was ready to bail. I was discouraged. It seemed to me that development aid was a broken model, and I didn't know what to do. And quite by accident, I discovered these crazy people in Europe that called themselves fair traders, and who had this whole notion of trade as opposed to aid, of trade as an alternative to aid that would be more empowering to farmers. And they basically said, you know, you're in a coffee growing region, we buy coffee. We'll pay you $1.40 a pound for your coffee. To put this into context, the local market price at that time was 10 cents a pound. And so I went out and tried to organize farmers, and no one believed that it was possible, save 24 brave souls that signed up and delivered 10 sacks of coffee each on consignment. And we exported 1 container of coffee to the fair traders. And 3 or 4 months later, we got the payment, and after cost, that left, we had $1 a pound left over to give back to farmers. And so we all met in the schoolhouse on the mountaintop in Santo Domingo, and I walked them through the numbers. And, of course, everyone showed up, the farmers, the wives, the grandmas, the kids, the dogs. Everyone had a machete on their belt. They wanted to know what I'd done with their coffee. And we walked through the numbers, $1.40 a pound, and then what we spent on sacks and what we spent on trucking and what we spent on the export license, the whole cost structure. It was small volume, so the cost structure was pretty expensive, but we had $1 a pound left over. Their neighbors were selling at 10 cents a pound. And I had a tackle box full of cash and a clipboard with everyone's name on it. And at the end of the talk, after the Q&A, I invited each family up one by one, and they signed their names and got, on average about $2,000 each. Whereas they would have gotten a tenth of that. They would have gotten maybe $200, $300 total cash income for the year. I mean, not even $1 a day. And instead, I was handing out $2,000 in cash, which was more money than anyone had probably ever seen in their lives. So, overnight, this experience became kind of a living legend, and, my new nickname was Pablo Un Dólar. And within the next couple of years, we had 3,000 families all over northern Nicaragua that were bringing their coffee together and milling it as a group, so adding value, selling a higher value add product, exporting direct, and getting so much more money that in turn we were able to invest in production, we were able to invest in quality, we were able to build infrastructure, we were able to train farmers that wanted to go organic, and about half of our farmers did go organic, and when they did that, they got an extra price premium. So this whole journey of building out the productive infrastructure and the business foundation for economic growth in the region, but then in addition to that, we dug wells. Right? We brought clean drinking water into villages for the first time on our own dime. We built clinics. We created high school scholarship programs. We take high school for granted here. In so much of the developing world, high school is free, but if you're a rural kid, the nearest high school is a 10-mile bus ride down the road. You got to pay for that, and you got to pay for uniform money. You got to pay for books, and that may only be $200 a year. But that $200 stands like a wall, locking generation after generation of young people out of a better future. Because if you got 1 acre of land, you probably can't afford that $200 a year. So we set up scholarship programs, giving kids $200 a year to stay in high school. And many of them went on to college. My friend Santiago Rivera is a small coffee farmer in northern Nicaragua, and his daughter Yolanda was one of these kids, and she graduated from high school. She was the first kid in the history of the entire community to graduate from high school thanks to this scholarship program. Last year she graduated from college. She studied biology and specialized in laboratory sciences, and now she's back in a clinic there in her community, serving her community. My wife is Nicaraguan. I wasn't going to stay there 11 years and not get married, right? So I get a chance to go back to Nicaragua every year, so I have this ongoing long-term relationship with these communities, and so I get to go back. I knew Yolandita when she was 5 years old. Now she's this amazing professional woman working in the community, living her dream. And you know what? Every time I go back to Santiago's house and we sit on the front porch and we drink coffee and we catch up, and Yolanda's there and she's talking, and all the little girls in the community, they come and kind of hang out on the porch. And yeah, of course they're there to look at the crazy gringo that shows up once a year, but they're looking as much at Yolanda as anyone else. I mean, Yolanda is a role model in that community for little girls who never had a role model like that before. So you can imagine the ripple effect in terms of the lives of the people in these communities that all starts with something as simple as a daily cup of coffee. Our daily cup of coffee. We made that possible. So, obviously this journey in Nicaragua changed my life. And it certainly changed the way I thought about markets and business and the role of markets and business in the struggle for social justice and in the struggle against poverty. And I came to believe that frankly, markets can be the most powerful lever for change and for empowering the poor that we could hope to have. So, armed with that crazy idea, I decided to move back to the States in '94 and went to business school and then started this organization in '98. So let me tell you a little bit about the organization I run and how that kind of fits into this fair trade model. We used to be called TransFair USA. We changed our name a couple of years ago to FairTrade USA. We are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to promote sustainable development, to alleviate poverty, and to promote sustainable agriculture around the world through this market-based approach that brings consumers, companies, and farmers together in a way that everyone wins. We have 3 core functions. So we certify products. We have a little label that says Fair Trade Certified. So, at the grocery store or in the cafe, if you see a sticker or a stamp on a product, coffee or bananas or tea, that says Fair Trade Certified, you know that that product comes from a sustainable farm where farmers got a better price, and that whole relationship has been independently verified by an auditing organization, by my organization. So that's our core function, to add value, to add credibility to companies that want to trade direct and do the right thing and want to tell consumers in a credible way what they're doing. We also have farmer training programs, doing business training with farmer groups around the world. And then finally, we work with consumer groups, with students, with churches, with community organizations, helping raise awareness around fair trade. Because at the end of the day, it all depends on consumer demand, right? I mean, fair trade is entirely born by consumer interest. And the day that consumers don't buy it is the day the whole thing crumbles. So we very proactively take on the challenge of awakening American consumers to what fair trade is all about. Here are a few numbers. So we launched our label 13 years ago. Today we have about 800 corporate partners, companies of all shapes and sizes, from small mission-driven companies to corporate giants like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, Ben & Jerry's. We work with Whole Foods, we work with Costco, work with Walmart. And those companies last year had a combined total sales of about $1.5 billion on their fair trade products. My organization doesn't buy or sell, right? We're kind of the handmaiden of this fair trade market. So that's the combined sales of all these companies that sell products with our label on it. Consumer awareness today is about 34%. So about 34% of American adults, when they see that fair trade label, they can tell you what it means. So that's about 200 million adults, roughly. And about half of those, sorry, not 200, that's about 70 million adults that can identify the fair trade label. And about half of those report that they're buying fair trade products. So that's good news, but it's also bad news. I mean, because our aspiration is to really make fair trade ubiquitous and to give conscious consumers a chance to buy fair trade products wherever they shop and in whatever product category. We certify more than coffee now. We certify tea and bananas, sugar and rice, flowers and wine. We just launched fair trade apparel last year. It's made with fair trade cotton from West Africa. It's manufactured in factories in India where workers get double the wage that they used to get. So the category expands every year based on consumer interest and on the interest of brands and retailers. So that's the overview. And of course, we're part of this global fair trade movement that started in Europe. Europe is way down the road in terms of market share, in terms of impact. They've been doing it 30 years longer than we have. So we're kind of following in their footsteps, but also trying to innovate the model in a way that makes it more scalable, that makes it more easily developed for the U.S. consumer and the U.S. market structure, which obviously is very different than in Europe. So let me just finish, and because I'm eager to hear what your questions and comments are. Let me just finish by reflecting a little bit on what I think fair trade means for this growing movement of social entrepreneurship. I think fair trade is kind of a great example of the social entrepreneurship movement insofar as it's clearly a market-based approach to the problems of poverty and environmental sustainability that is kind of distinctly different from the traditional approaches of government or of well-meaning charitable organizations that we've had tackling those problems in the past. And I suggested earlier what fair trade meant for farmers. I mean, it's all about farmers developing business skills and going direct in order to improve their lives. You might ask, well, what's in it for business? Why would a company sign up for fair trade? And I think increasingly companies are realizing that there's real value for them and for their business in this sustainability category, broadly speaking, whether it's fair trade or organics or green products. And I think that value comes from three areas. One is that companies increasingly want to know where their products come from, to put it simply. Right? So in the past, perhaps globalization was all about companies going overseas in search of products made with really cheap labor and low environmental standards. I think today companies are realizing that what's called supply chain security, that is the stability of those raw materials that they're sourcing from overseas, is really important to their business. If you think about it, a high-end coffee company like PJ's really depends on delivering delicious coffee. Like if we go into PJ's and the coffee tastes nasty tomorrow, we're going to stop going. So they really need to know that their farmers are getting taken care of. They may be paying a high price up here, but if there are 15 middlemen between them and the farmer, then their businesses, PJ's business is put at risk. So they need to know that the money they're paying gets all the way back to the grower. So that transparency in the supply chain and that traceability back to the grower is really critical for the success of the business community, increasingly. And fair trade does that, so that's why it's good business for a company like PJ's or Starbucks or whoever. Second reason, reputation. No company wants to be caught with child labor, with a child labor scandal in their supply chain. No company wants to be caught, with some scandal in the papers about how, the workers growing our bananas were crop dusted with pesticides, right? I mean, so there's this desire, I believe, on the business in the business community to really source products in a way that don't put at risk the reputation and the brand of the company. And I'm not suggesting that impulse is mercenary. I think often it comes out of a real desire on the part of the owners of the company to support sustainable agriculture, to support responsible business. But there is a reputational dimension to that. I think the third impulse that we see in the business community is really a growing awareness on the part of business leaders that there is increasingly a consumer segment that wants great products that also make us feel good. Great products that have social or environmental benefits to them. And that's not a particularly price-sensitive consumer segment. Typically, consumers of sustainable products, of organics, of whatever, are willing to pay a little bit more to have that added value and to feel like they made a difference. So there's a real market opportunity there. And I'm not talking about 100% of consumers. I mean, the conscious consumer segment we estimate to be around 30%, whether it's 30% of American adults. And whether it's 30 or 20, it's still a lot of people, and it's a lot of people with a significant amount of discretional spending. So there's a market opportunity there that's led a lot of companies into this sustainable space. The last comment I would make is it seems to me that we're at a really interesting point in history where we are increasingly awakening to the impact of our purchasing decisions. And you know, you see it in all kinds of ways. So for example, the buy local phenomenon, which has just kind of sprung out of nowhere. Now, you know, it's all over the grocery stores, buy local. And that whole growing interest that people are demonstrating in knowing where their food came from, right? And really understanding that more. Organics, green products, you see increasingly people looking for social or environmental value in the things that they buy, or wanting the things that they buy, wanting the things that we buy to be consistent with who we are as people. I mean, no one wants to eat a chocolate bar. No one would buy a chocolate bar if they thought there was child slavery in the production of that chocolate bar, right? So there's just kind of, at its most basic level, a do no harm impulse that I think really resonates with core values of most Americans. We're a nation that loves to root for the underdog. We're a nation that really believes in a fair wage for a hard day's work. And so these core values resonate, and we realize that there are problems in the world, and I think there's this growing realization that the things that we eat, the things that we drink, all make a difference. And that's a very powerful notion for a nation of really busy people. Because most Americans are really busy, and we're overloaded with information, and we've got our own problems to worry about. So, you know, who has time to write a letter to the editor? Who has time to, you know, get involved in a local organization? Who has time to vote, right? I mean, half the country votes, half the country doesn't. So I think civic involvement in general, is increasingly challenging in our nation. And I'm not suggesting that we give up on civic involvement in kind of the traditional ways. But I am suggesting that maybe the products that we buy give us another outlet, another way to lift our voice. Because we may not all vote, but we all eat. 70% of y'all raise your hands, drink coffee, but the other 30% drink tea, right? We eat bananas, we eat chocolate. And so if we can make those choices a vote for a better world, that's incredibly empowering, right? If we realize that through something as simple and easy as a daily cup of coffee, we can reach halfway around the world and help Yolanda stay in high school. That's an incredibly powerful concept. And I would argue that concept is what is driving the growth of the fair trade market today. We can do so much and in such an easy and effortless way. Every purchase matters. And so I would suggest that the American consumer, that's us, by the way, the American consumer is probably one of the greatest forces for change that the world has ever seen. We are, collectively, we are a giant. But we're a sleeping giant. We don't yet know our own power. And so I invite you all to join me in trying to wake up the giant, because when she speaks, the world will change. Thank you. Thank you. Who has a question? Yeah. Sorry, hang on 2 seconds. Do we have a mic for Q&A? Yes, no, maybe? Please don't make me repeat every question. My voice is hanging by a thread. Okay, go ahead.
I know in an earlier lecture you mentioned that FairTrade USA works with countries in South America and Asia. And also, like, from our IDEV class, we're talking about Wangarnathai and her work in Kenya, and really good environmental and sustainable agriculture and work helping the communities. And I was wondering if you had any aspirations to increase not from just food, but maybe other kind of products or in Africa or anything.
So we are definitely working in Africa. Today, FairTrade covers 70 countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. So West Africa, for example, is very big for cocoa, for chocolate. That's where most of the world's cocoa is grown, in Ghana and Ivory Coast. We've got a big program there. East Africa is big for coffee. So Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia. So we also have a program there, and we're working with several 100,000 small coffee farmers. And other parts of the continent too, for fruits and vegetables and tea. So Africa is big. And it's interesting because Africa used to be seen as kind of the chronic case of poverty that was almost unsolvable. And it's really interesting to see entrepreneurship now on the rise in Africa and growth rates on the rise in both urban and rural communities. It's very encouraging. And FairTrade is just a small part of that journey, but we're very definitely working in Africa. And we're working, to your point, or to your question, we're definitely working beyond agriculture. So we started a couple of years ago with FairTrade certification of soccer balls and other sports balls out of Pakistan, which is like a great product because historically the Pakistani sports ball industry was just rife with child labor and severe exploitation. So out of several hundred sports ball factories in Pakistan, we've certified 7. It's a good start. And in fact, at the an exchange store right here on campus, you can get a FairTrade football that comes from one of those factories. So last year we launched apparel, as I mentioned, and we're really interested to see if that catches on. Apparel is still a pilot for us, so no major brand has taken it up. We're working with a number of small mission-driven brands, but we've talked to Nike, we've talked to Levi's, we've talked to The Gap, we've talked to a lot of brands and retailers. And the timing wasn't great, trying to launch FairTrade apparel in a recession. So, we're still hopeful that we can mainstream apparel, but it hasn't taken off the way food products have. So stay tuned. Yeah, right there in the middle. Yay, we have a microphone.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to hear more about, you just mentioned the recession, how the economic downturn has impacted FairTrade, and whether you've seen people continue to choose these products when they're not making as much money.
Yeah, so if you check out our website, fairtradeusa.org, you'll see a press release that came out last week. There's an industry organization called SPINS that looks at sales data, and SPINS just came out with new data indicating that over the last 12 months, FairTrade sales in the U.S. have grown by 65%. So strong growth despite the recession. My interpretation of that is, one, the recession really didn't hit this particular consumer segment as hard as it might have hit other consumer segments. And two, I think once you start buying products that are meaningful to you, right? Once you start buying organic produce, or once you start, buying a brand that somehow connects to your values, it's hard to go back. Frankly, I think it was easier for people to forego that new high-def TV than it was to go from their FairTrade coffee back to Folgers. I think, once you kind of cross that line and start identifying yourself and your values with a certain brand, it's not so easy to just say, oh, I'll go back. That's my hypothesis. I don't have any data. I just have a gut feel on it. Who else? Yeah.
I'm just curious, what exactly is your certification process like? For example, like the sports ball factory in Pakistan, do you physically go there and see what their practices are like, or how do you determine that what they're doing is acceptable?
All y'all get that? I'm so glad to be back in a place where I can say all y'all and no one laughs. I live in California now, and people laugh at me when I say all y'all. So, two things, the standard and the certification. So the standard, the FairTrade standard, is this rigorous list of criteria that farmers, or in this case, factory owners, have to live up to in order to get certified. In the case of agriculture, it has everything to do with how labor is treated, so worker safety and health, wages, right to organize. It has to do with environmental conditions, so farmers have to sign up for sustainable agriculture. They have to take care of the soil, take care of the water. A lot of the worst chemicals that are used in agriculture are not allowed. And, you know, basically farmers have to be good, responsible businesses. The same in the Pakistani sports ball factory, but there obviously it's less about, well, it's not at all about farming. It's all about labor conditions, but then also the issue around environmental impact. So those factories and those farms get inspected every year. So there's an inspector that shows up once a year. They do a rigorous, 2, 3, 4 day inspection, depending on how big the co-op is or how big the factory is. And then that farm will either get certified or not certified for one more year. So every year it's renewed. It's very much like organics. We very much mirror the process for organic inspection and certification. And every year, as you might guess, people get certified or recertified with conditions. And so that really creates a path for continuous improvement, which really, in my estimation, is what it's all about. Sustainability, sustainability and responsibility are not like this, kind of black or white, on or off condition, really. It's a journey. And so most of the farms and factories that we work with are on a process of continual improvement with their various labor and environmental practices over time. Yeah, at the back.
So going off of that last question about the auditing process, one of the major critiques of the organics sort of market is that you stamp a product and it is a feel-good product, but the process leading up to that isn't always as rigorous as one might believe. And I would imagine that as you become more well-known in the fair trade market and people become more aware and you increase the level of people who understand what that label means, that there would be a higher responsibility on you to maintain the integrity of that auditing process. And I know that if people come in for 4 days, they don't always see the long-term repercussions. And I know that there's a lot of pressure on companies, especially in a recession, to increase their profit and therefore potentially misrepresent what's going on. And I was wondering if you do work on more qualitative indicators and more sort of long-term things so that it's not just a 4-day checklist on a clipboard that someone's reviewing once a year. Sorry.
A skeptic.
No,
I'm so glad. I'm so glad to
excited.
get your question. Thank you. That is exactly the right question you should be asking. So obviously no audit system is fail-safe, right? There's fraud in any audit system, whether it's financial audits or organic audits, fair trade, whatever, right? I think the issue is how robust is your system for detecting fraud, and what do you do when you detect it? And I think, frankly, the fact that fair trade has never had a major scandal in that regard is a testimony to both the rigor of the audit process and the will to hold both farmers and companies accountable for their behavior. So if they fall out of compliance, then they're not recertified. A lot of the way that confidence is built in the validity of the audit is through what we call internal controls. So it's not just the 4 days that the auditor is there on site. It's really what internal controls, either in the factory or in the co-op, have been developed so that there's effective self-policing, as it were, right? So that co-op members, for example, are all kind of keeping an eye on each other and their practices, and constantly encouraging better practices internally. Furthermore, you know, I would argue that one of the important success factors in fair trade is precisely that we've taken or we've moved beyond the zero-sum game, right? So we're not saying to farmers, live up to this rigorous code of conduct and good luck figuring out how to cover the cost, right? I mean, I think that's the failure of the code of conduct approach that we've seen ever since the sweatshop scandals of the 70s and 80s, right? Codes of conduct look good on paper, but how do you really encourage living up to those codes when you're forcing the manufacturer to cover that cost out of their own pocket? So what fair trade does is says, live up to the code and we'll pay you more money for it. The end consumer will pay for it, right? So fair trade farms, by definition, get more money to cover the cost of sustainable production, to cover the extra cost of harvesting in a more sustainable way and taking care of their labor force and so on. So essentially, we're creating a powerful financial incentive for those farmers and factory owners to participate. So they have no real reason to cheat. Now, yeah, it's always tempting to cheat, and some do, and they get kicked out. But for the most part, I think the brilliance of the model is that we've basically said sustainability costs a little more, and we as consumers should bear that cost. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One, when you cut out the middleman in your coffee farm, I suspect you got death threats. How did you deal with those? And then the second question is to new entrepreneurs, particularly first-time entrepreneurs, what's your advice to them on how to persist in the face of the challenges that a first-time entrepreneur is?
That's a good question. Never got any death threats from the middlemen. Unfortunately, there was no shortage of small farmers for them to move off and buy from. But interestingly enough, we ended up hiring, in some of the co-ops, we ended up hiring the local middlemen because they had pickup trucks and knowledge. So it's always better when you can give someone that you used to compete with and give them a job. The entrepreneurship question is a good one. And, you know, I suspect that the entrepreneurs in the room may have better answers than I. You know, I just reflect on my own journey, setting up this organization. You know, I wrote the business plan for this organization and decided that I needed $500,000 to launch, and then went out and raised $100,000 and went ahead and launched anyway. So it's always been a bootstrapping effort. 6 months into it, I went off salary, and you know, didn't pay myself a salary for 6 months. Second year, I went off salary for 6 months too. I mean, like a for-profit venture, our venture, even though it was a nonprofit, was very much in that mold of, you know, bootstrapping and a lot of sacrifice and perseverance and a lot of idealism on the part of the team that I assembled to stick with it. It's got to be passion. Got to be a dream, got to be passion, got to be a real commitment. And you know, that's common whether it's entrepreneurs in the business world or social entrepreneurs in the change world. Those are common threads. Willingness to take risk, willingness to innovate, try not to be afraid of failure. It was the hardest thing for me to learn how to embrace failure and celebrate it in the organization, because that's the way you learn. But of course, you know, we're not programmed that way. We're programmed to always win and deny it when we lose or make excuses for it, right? And so for me, it was a real challenge to build a culture internally of experimentation and of celebrating lessons learned, whether we learn by hitting our heads against the wall or by going forward. So those are a few thoughts. You want to share a few of your own?
Perseverance, having that goal and that ideal, and surrounding yourself by a spouse in my case.
There you go.
Friends and family who support that.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to add something to that, Stan? Successful entrepreneur that you are?
Well, you know, I think you've hit on a number of the ones, but the only other one that I would add is that when you start, it very rarely progresses the way you plan. And in our situation, we planned to sell 100,000 systems the first year, and we sold 800 pieces. The other thing that I would say is that as an entrepreneur, you oftentimes want to spend money and get things done and drive down the path of your plan, but the less money you spend is a shallower ditch that you have to fill in later. And the longer that you can stay going, the more you'll learn really the objective truth of the situation and have to succeed. So, and that speaks to the perseverance piece.
Yeah.
It's not just about your own energy, it's about not digging the ditch too deep so that you can learn as you go and really refine what you're doing.
It's a great reflection. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's this social entrepreneurship movement, and yet social entrepreneurs are very much like any other kind of entrepreneur in that, you know, many of the same challenges and many of the same traits are required in order to be successful. Rebecca, you had a question, didn't you?
I do. Can I ask mine after one other person?
Oh, you're chickening out. Okay.
No,
Yeah, one more question. Go for it. This gentleman's been patient. Told you I was going to call you out.
Thanks for this talk and for all this great work. Labor has been a theme of your comments and greater labor fairness. And you mentioned you work with Walmart, and as you know, they are famous and infamous all over the world for bad labor standards. So I have to imagine that in your organization you had lots of robust debates about whether you should work with them or not. And if my hunch is right, I'm just wondering if you could give us a sense of those debates and why you concluded that you should go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. So my service and my label is a product label. So I'm not endorsing a company. You know, what I'm doing with my certification service and with the FairTrade certified label is I'm reassuring you, the consumer, that, you know, that package of coffee or that bunch of bananas or that box of tea came from a sustainable farm where the farmers got a fair price. Whether you buy that bunch of bananas in Whole Foods or in Walmart, whether you buy that coffee in your local cafe or in Starbucks or wherever it is, my assertion is that with that product, you're making a difference. You're making a connection. Now, clearly that does become a bit of a dilemma from a brand and reputational perspective when that product is sold in a company that has reputational issues. And there are many. So, you know, the way I deal with that is, one, I don't make statements about companies. You know, you'll never find me saying this company is good and this company is bad, or this company, because it's doing fair trade, is a great company. I don't, you know, we don't audit all of a company's social and environmental practices. So in fact, I can't make a statement about a company and its practices. But what I can do is tell you that a given product came from a sustainable farmer, right? So we manage how we message it. We also get on the same page with companies about how they're going to message it. So in fact, through our contracts with the companies, we get to sign off on all press releases around fair trade. So that's how we manage for the possibility of greenwashing or of companies doing a little bit of fair trade and then talking about how great they are. And you know what? Companies that are reputationally challenged don't want to make a big deal because they know they're going to be called out for it. So in fact, it's never like a tug of war where they want to toot their own horn and we don't want them to. I mean, everyone knows that the amount of publicity around their fair trade activities needs to be kind of commensurate with the volume and the impact. And then finally, you know, what ultimately kind of decided that internal debate, which in fact it was kind of by going back to the core principle. What are we here for? Well, we're here to benefit farmers. And you know, if you sit with Santiago and Yolanda on their front porch, out in the middle of nowhere, Nicaragua, and you ask them, do you care, you know, what company is buying your product? They don't. They want to know, you know, what the terms of trade are. They want to know what the price is. They want to know if there's transparency. They want to know if there's dignity. But you know that whole notion of, oh no, I don't want to sell my coffee at a good price to Walmart. I'd rather sell it at a low price to someone else. No, that's illogical. So that ultimately led us to believe that we didn't really have the right to deny Walmart or anyone else the option of selling fair trade products. And furthermore, I don't want fair trade products to be just this elite phenomenon that's only available for those of us who shop at Whole Foods. Because guess what? It sells really well at Walmart, and that really reaffirms my faith in Americans. Right? The people who shop in Walmart also want fair trade products. I love that.
And Whole Foods has its own problems. So.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
All right, last question. So I know that I as an individual can support fair trade by purchasing products. What else can I do, or can we as a community do to support the movement?
Thanks. Good question. Well, you nailed the first one, right? Look for the label, and when you see fair trade, the fair trade label at the store, buy the product. That's like step number one. This afternoon we went into PJ's and here on campus and looked for the fair trade label, didn't see it. So, you know, very nicely we asked if the manager was there, and she wasn't, but we talked to the barista and said, you know, y'all got fair trade? And she was like, well, not sure. And so we had a conversation. It was a nice conversation. That's where it starts. When you see the label, buy it. When you don't see the label, ask for it. Have a conversation. Educate folks. Well, you know, we told her, hey, you know, this is something that's going to be more visible on campus. Y'all might want to get involved. It was a great conversation. She didn't feel upset about it. And next time we'll talk to the manager, and next time after that, maybe PJ's will have fair trade coffee. So that's where it starts. But beyond that, you know, there are a lot of other ways that people can get involved. And here on campus, there's just the beginning now of a Fair Trade University campaign. Fair Trade Universities is one of our programs to connect with kids on campuses around the country and get fair trade products on campus, in the dining hall, in the cafes, in the office buildings. Also to get fair trade products, or rather get fair trade as an issue into the curriculum, right? Because it's, I mean, there are great fair trade case studies that are relevant for business school classes, for political science classes, international development, economics. So the Fair Trade Universities program is a framework for really advancing understanding and awareness of fair trade, and, oh, by the way, also moving more fair trade sales to help more farmers. This is a brand new campaign. Fair Trade Universities launched just last year. I think there are only 3 in the nation so far. But here on campus, a group of outstanding students are starting a Fair Trade University effort. And their goal is by the end of the school year, by May, for Tulane to become one of the first fair trade universities in the nation. So my buddy Jesse over here, Jesse, raise your hand. He's the man. So Jesse is, along with a group of other students, helping to organize this effort, and he's looking for help. So if you want to get involved in getting Tulane to be one of the first fair trade universities in America, Jesse would love to get your email address. By the way, I know someone mentioned in exchange, you have a fair trade store right here on campus. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a reception right after this event at In Exchange. So y'all head on over there because they've got cool stuff. That, you know, that's the way. That's the way to get involved. Lift your voice, plug in, and in the case of the Fair Trade University program, I'm looking forward to coming back in May and celebrating Tulane. It's probably not the 5th. There's probably 1 or 2 more ahead of you in the pipeline, but definitely in the top 10 in the nation. So that'll be good. Thank you all again. Thank you so much for coming.